Hey guys, Modelling Weekly here. Well, today's video will be a little different, as you may have guessed. I'll finally be bringing you the 5,000 subscriber special that I promised you 1,300 subscribers ago, the Workbench tour. This will cover all aspects of my work area, storage, display cabinet, and also a peek at the stash. So please make yourselves comfortable and let's begin the video. Okay, so I guess we'll start the tour off at the spray booth that I've been filming in for what has to be a couple of years now at the very least. It's homemade using sheets of 1.5mm acrylic fixed together with L brackets, pot rivets and super glue. Then of course there's the mesh at the bottom and underneath a 6-inch duct that leads to a pretty powerful fan that I'll show you guys later on. The spray booth is also quite a handy way to store clamps and pegs on the sides, so I have a few on here. In terms of lighting, I've been using the BenQ desk lamp that I received for free to review a while ago, and it's worked out pretty well for me so far. Moving to the left a bit now, I have my weathering products in an ammo crate. I thought this would be quite a cool way of storing them, so here we are. It's quite hard to film, but I have all of my ammo stuff, some Ikea products, and a bunch of AK stuff in there as well. Moving on to behind the spray booth now, I have my Tamiya and Mr. Colour paints all stored up on a nice big homemade rack, again using the same acrylic sheet as shelving. This is one of the very new additions to my setup, and so far it's been great. I have enough space there for about 100 or so Tamiya paints, which is plenty for what I need. The shelf is a pretty basic design with some simple slots added to fit in 7 shelves, but it does the trick very effectively. Between the paints and the spray booth, I have my set of Winsor & Newton oil paints. These things are brilliant and very cost effective at the same time, so I'd highly recommend picking up a set. On the right side of the spray booth I store the products that I use the most. This being Tamiya Extra Thins and Mr. Colour thinners, isopropyl alcohol, cocktail sticks and some cotton buds. This is just a really accessible location, and since they are on a mini cutting mat I can pretty easily move them around if need be. Right behind here I have my little tool storage rack. Much like the other aspects of my workbench, this is also homemade using MDF, acrylic sheet and some thin aluminium rods. This is a great little accessible element of the workbench, and it's plenty big enough to store all my files, tweezers, engraving tools and side cutters. It also has a little shelf built in underneath, which is pretty useful for storing sanding sticks and small pieces of sanding sponge that I have cut up to reach tighter areas of a model. Moving in front of the cutting mat now, I have my airbrushes set up. I use a combination of my Harder and Steenbeck Ultra for varnishes and primers, with the Infinity reserved for painting and detail work to keep it as clean as possible. They are both brilliant airbrushes and both brilliantly manufactured. Moving on now, yet another homemade paint rack. This time it's designed to hold all of my dropper bottles from various companies including Ammo by MIG, Ikea Model Air and Ikea Model Colour. I also have my micro set and sol up here along with the Infinity's box in case I need to do a needle size swap. The rack is again made using an MDF board, and this time with 8mm aluminium tubes used to support the paint bottles. Underneath the rack is where I store all of the awkwardly sized bottles that I own that don't really fit in anywhere else. I have a couple of bottles of polyurethane primer, super glue, alclad gloss, white spirit and airbrush cleaner. I also have this sort of glass box thing which I use as a hard surface to cut out PE parts on. Moving further to the right, this is where I store all of my tape. Again, everything is supported using the same aluminium tubes pushed into a piece of MDF board. Something I forgot to mention is that if any of you want more information on how these racks and shelves are made, please feel free to ask in the comments below and I'll tell you more about them in more depth. Anyway, back to the tape. I generally use a combination of frog tape for larger areas and quite a lot of Tamiya masking tape of different thicknesses for everything else. Then underneath this I have my paintbrush pot, and there's not really much to say about this. It's an old biscuit tin and I put my brushes in it. In front of all of this, there's a nice big clearing to put any kit boxes or parts that I'm working on at the moment, and as you can see, it's currently occupied by Revell's enormous 1/48th scale JU52, which will be a video at some point in the future. There's also a bit of stationery related stuff here, but that's pretty dull, so we won't spend much time on that. So that's essentially everything on top of the workbench done. Let's have a look at underneath and in the drawers. Directly underneath you can see the 6-inch duct that connects to the spray booth, which feeds into a pretty powerful airflow fan that shifts some serious air and pumps it straight outside. As you can imagine, drilling a huge hole through the wall to the outside was a pretty big step to take, but in the long run it's been incredibly beneficial for my airbrushing efficiency. Next to this I have my compressor. Now it's nothing to write home about, but it has done the trick for a few years now. I believe the original model has been discontinued, though it's very similar to other cheaper compressors on the market. All you really need to look out for is if they have some sort of storage for air. In my case, air is stored inside this metal tubing that acts as a handle, which is pretty cool. I've set mine up with a splitter so that it feeds both of my airbrushes simultaneously. Obviously, this is only necessary if you don't have quick release fittings like me. Anyway, enough of that, let's have a look at the drawers. The first drawer has been filled with an assortment of things. I've got my gloves in here for airbrushing, which is great because of the easily accessible position. Then there is a nice assortment of sponges, which are generally used for chipping or stippling effects, though I sometimes use them to stick cocktail sticks into when I'm painting smaller parts. Then there's my Mr. Surfacer along with my collection of Ikea metal colour paints. Oh, and of course my wet palette, which is currently about as dry as it could possibly be and covered in paint. The next drawer down is essentially what I've designated as my scratch building drawer. As you can see, I've got my Dremel stored in here along with all the fixings, some old side snips for cutting anything that would damage my nicer snips. There's some photo frames and balsa wood for dioramas, and I also have a few sizes of lead wire along with brass tubes and little chains. These disgusting looking things are actually milliput, which I sometimes use for filling gaps and repairing things. The third drawer down is mostly full of what I call utilities, this being a few thousand spare cocktail sticks, cotton buds, alcohol, bubble wrap and a ventilator mask, some larger and smaller mixing cups, white spirit and spare kitchen roll. This is all pretty dull, though they are essentials when it comes to modelling in general, so I like to keep a decent stock of all of them. Finally, and I say finally because the last drawer is filled with trash pretty much, we have the fourth drawer, which is where I have very tidily stored all my wires and other electronics. There's also some camera stuff in here along with an airbrush case which I believe belongs to the Ultra, though I may be wrong. Well, that leaves just two things left to cover. My display cabinet and stash. Let's have a look at those now. Most of my recent models are currently being stored in this Ikea glass display cabinet. It's pretty basic, though it's a brilliant and effective design for us modelers. It's also pretty cheap. I have modified it slightly though to have 3 more shelves than it used to. They are suspended from the relative shelf above using little copper hooks and some pretty strong nylon fishing line. It's a pretty effective mod if you are looking to up your storage space. Now let's have a quick look at the stash. It's stored under my bed in this sort of roll-out drawer as it would otherwise take up way too much space elsewhere. It's not the biggest stash in the world, though it's got a stable population and provides a nice choice for whenever I want to build something new. I'm not going to go through everything in the stash in this video, though if you want to know more about it, I've attached a link to my Scalemates profile in the description if you want to have a closer look. Well, that's everything covered. Roll the end credits. So there you have it, a full tour of my workbench at last. I'd just like to say a massive thank you to every one of you that decided to subscribe to my channel, allowing me to reach that juicy 5k subscriber milestone, which is more like 6,300 now because of my pristine timing. But jokes aside, I really do appreciate all of the amazing support that you guys have given me over the years, and I hope to keep on providing for you guys for years into the future. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye!